HIPAA for Dummies.
We give them a free podcast, and we even offer them a money-back guarantee.
Yeah, double your money-back guarantee.
You're listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, where HIPAA and humor collide to make learning fun. Your delightful hosts are Donna Grindle and David Sims. Relax. HIPAA help is on the way.
Welcome to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast. Today, we're going to look at the OCR CAP OMG WTF of a breach. So basically, what that means is that somebody screwed up. And so we want to figure out what the hell that means. And what happens in the media world, when there's a breach that goes on, people look at the fines of the breach and maybe how the breach happens, but they don't look at the totality of it. So today, Donna and I are going to dig down deeper into what that involves. So my co-host, as always, is Donna Grindle. Hi, Donna.
Hello, David Sims, my co-host as well.
How have you been?
I've been great. I got to take a couple of weeks and work in South Florida.
Well, very good. Very good. So down in the Keys again?
Yeah, I was feeling good. Feeling good.
Now you're back to the real world. I like
the island life, man.
Well, as we are recording, South Carolina just had I think they said it was a flood of biblical proportions. So that explains why the animals were lined up 2 by 2 in my yard.
Yeah.
So now that that's over with.
You and the dog were in the front of the line, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
She's your favorite.
Yeah. We tried to figure out which kid we were going to throw overboard so we can make room for the dog.
It's the way it would be in my house. The dog goes first and everybody else, right?
Yeah. So before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about how when people look at the breaches and they talk about the money involved, they're really only looking at a portion of that, not really the overall aspect of what involves the damage and cleanup of what happened. And we know what to look for and we know what to look at. And we're not shocked by the figure put on an announcement when somebody says they're going to find somebody, $500,000. You and I both know that that's just going to be scratching the surface, really, of what they're going to end up having to pay when you start looking at everything else that comes down the pike. So I know today you wanted to look at one in particular and kind of dive into that. So tell us a little bit more about it.
Well, I'll be happy to do that.
Thank you very much.
I always get, everybody else wants to talk about the money and the settlements and stuff because it is the shock and awe factor that everybody wants to put into the get you started mode. But to me, while it's not as sexy as a headline, when I saw the recent announcement of the settlement with Cancer Care Group in Indiana, it was a $750,000 settlement. And okay, wow, that's a lot. But then the thing that really got my attention was it included a 3-year corrective action plan, also known as a CAP.
That's where our acronym came from on the,
that's right.
On the opener.
OCR issued a corrective action plan. OMG! 3 years?
Yeah. So that's going to cost a lot more than $750,000 probably.
Well, the problem is that all the corrective action plan generally does is say, okay, here's all the things you're not doing in your compliance program that now we want you to do. And not only are we laying out exactly what you have to do, but we're giving you the time frames that you have to do it, and we have to approve of it every step of the way. And a lot of people don't realize just how intensive these corrective action plans can be because all they do is say $750,000. Oh, my insurance will cover that. Well, we just had an episode about whether or not that will work. But there's nothing that your insurance will cover in these corrective action plans because it's work you're supposed to do for your compliance.
Mm-hmm.
So the Cancer Care Group breach settlement or resolution agreement that just came out just to fill us in or the listeners in on what that was. It was announced on August 31st, so it's the most recent one. But it relates to a July 2012 incident where a laptop bag was stolen from an employee's car in Indianapolis. and it had actually in it unencrypted backup drives along with the laptop. And by the time that it was all said and done, they say about 55,000 people. 55,000 people were on there. So clearly well over the 500 patient limit. They had to notify HHS, who initiated an investigation. So that investigation, so they notified HHS within the 60 days. This happened in July 2012. Within the 60 days, it's just now been announced what the settlement is. So number one, when these things happen, it can take years to resolve. So it's a thing that's hanging over you for years. And trust me, having worked with the people that are going through these things and trying to figure things out, it's a big weight on you. Especially the smaller you are, the bigger the weight, because there's less distribution, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that we work with people on is let's go ahead and try and do as much of this work that we know you're going to need to do before you reach that settlement point, because it'll get you a leg up, so to speak. Because these corrective action plans, while sometimes we see them as a year, 3 years, I think there's even one that was 5. I could be wrong on that, but there's, I think, one that didn't have a corrective action plan. And when OCR was asked about it, they said it was a case where everything had been done in that time frame between the breach and the settlement. Well, when you review the corrective action plans, that's where you really see what OCR says you should be doing, because they're telling them specifically, you will do this, then you will do this, X, Y, and Z. So everybody talks about not having guidance. I see the corrective action plans as a great deal of guidance.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Because the next piece, if you don't meet the corrective action plan, then that means you're in breach of your agreement, and they can go back to the table and then bring down the hammer on every single legal enforcement that they can do. And clearly 55,000 people, $750,000 isn't hitting every single violation.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be big if you don't do it. So basically you pay the money, or your insurance company pays the money if you're fortunate enough to have insurance that will, but then this corrective action plan kicks in. And let's talk about the obligations that are in the corrective action plan.
Well, let me guess. The first thing is probably going to be perform a risk analysis.
Ding, 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 ding.
Yay, yay.
You're the winner, David.
I am a winner. So,
yeah, winner.
And yeah. And this is the part that I guess it makes you scratch your head, because that's the first part. That's always the first part, always the first step. And we referred to this in a past episode, and I don't remember the number right off the top of my head, but where you have to, I guess your pre-step is to get all your things in order. And we talked about that on that previous episode. But the first step to kind of get into the actual doing HIPAA is to perform your risk analysis. So I guess it just still kind of makes me scratch my head when they come up and say, part of your corrective action plan is for you to conduct a risk analysis. And I don't know, maybe you do, but are they requiring them to do that because they didn't have one, or just in addition to what they already have?
Well, in the resolution agreement, you'll see the covered conduct or conduct that's causing them to do it. And almost always it says from the time, and it generally says from 2005 until 2012, they never did a thorough risk analysis. So yes, it generally says in the top of the agreement, this is what you did wrong. And it starts there, because they'll always tell you the number one thing they find that's missing is a proper risk analysis.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't personally understand why people just ignore it. And even when we're trying to get people to understand to do them, they're like, can't you just skip over this? Can't you just give me a checklist or to-do list? And we talk about that in the other episode, so we shouldn't go down that rabbit hole. But the number one thing they're supposed to do in their corrective action plan is conduct a current, comprehensive, and thorough risk analysis. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Then they develop and implement a risk management plan. Again, we talk about that. It's what you're supposed to do. Review and revise your policies and procedures. Wow, this sounds like us just going through a compliance program with somebody, doesn't it?
It does.
review and revise your training program. Okay. Then they have 2 additional pieces, reportable events and annual reports, which are added in there, which we'll get into in just a second. But the important thing is the first 4 things are things that are required of any HIPAA compliance program. It's what you're supposed to do. Well, everybody's like, okay, well, it's what they're supposed to do. Well, what makes the corrective action plans, we'll call it more intense, is that from the date of the agreement, you have 90 days to complete that risk analysis plan, the thorough risk analysis, just the risk analysis, and submit it to OCR for their approval. So now it's not something that you can work out and tweak and figure out. You got 90 days to figure it out and do a risk analysis, send it to them, and they have 60 days to respond with a written explanation of their disapproval, comments, and recommendations of how you can revise it. At that point, you have 60 days to redo it and resubmit it. And that cycle goes over and over and over until they're happy with your risk analysis. Yeah. Time frames. You're getting their approval down to, dotting the I's and crossing the T's. Then you go to step 2 and the same thing happens. Now you do your risk management plan. You got 60 days to send it to them. And then there's 30 days on some of the other stuff, but you're getting these constant things, all 4 of those steps each time before you can move on. You've got to get approval of step 1. Then you got to get approval of step 2, and you've got all those time frames that have to take place. And then you have implementation timing that has to take place. And, the policies and procedures and the training programs, it's like as soon as you get those, then you're like, there's 30-day turnaround timelines. So it's not the same. You're doing what you're supposed to do, but you're doing it on a crash course where it's tested. And I don't know about you, but if I had to feel the pressure of making sure that OCR is checking my work every step of the way, while I feel confident in what I'm doing, I'd still freak out. Mm-hmm. What would you do, David?
I would call 911 again. Yeah, I think that...
you just call me, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I would. Like, Dono! I'm in Key West. I can't help you. I think that, properly doing the work of HIPAA is stressful enough as it is, and you kind of have your own timeline, even though I think that there should definitely be some goals that are set from the beginning so you know what your expectations are. But having OCR hanging over your head is that's added stress that I don't think anybody really needs to have to deal with.
Mm-mm. And to do it every step of the way. We're not talking like, okay, here's our plan. If you approve our plan, we're done. No, this has to happen. So you've got the 90-day time frame, the 60-day time frame, and that loop, staying in that loop. How long is it going to take for you to figure that out? I don't know how many times it takes because I haven't had to get caught in the loop, let's say. But I can say that there's definitely a lot of work involved to meet that level of documentation when you go 0 to 90. Mm-hmm. Because if these people have already done a lot of this stuff, they wouldn't necessarily have a corrective action plan at all, or at least not one this stringent, that's 3 years. So you start with build your compliance program the way you're supposed to, and you're going to do it within a very specific time frame. And you're going to review every freaking part of your systems in this brief time frame. And if everything goes well, in like 6 months, you've done a crash course in compliance review.
Yeah.
And gotten it approved by the teacher.
Now, the last 2 things they put on them, though, those were kind of outside of the norm, right?
Yeah. So that's what takes it above and beyond. So first, there's reportable events. And this is the part where I'm like, I could see this really becoming an issue for some people, just knowing what they go through in a day-to-day basis. But what it says is anytime you receive information that a workforce member may have failed to comply with the policies and procedures. So no, we're not talking a breach. We're not talking, they just didn't follow the policies and procedures. Mm-hmm. then you have to investigate. And if after investigating, it's determined that the workforce member did fail to comply with your policies and procedures, so just not following the rules. Nothing bad happened as far as PHI goes. My people didn't follow the rules. And we talked about it's the people.
In which we see all the time.
Exactly.
Even the people that are doing a good job of it. I mean, they're violating a policy and procedure, regularly.
It's like, stay on top of your policies and procedures. Okay, and try to make sure. And I'm dealing with people that'll say, I forgot, I was in a hurry, I wasn't there that day that we talked about it. There's a million reasons that people fail to comply with a policy and procedure that has nothing to do with absolute security failures. It's the people. Well, anytime somebody fails to comply with a policy and procedure, you have to notify HHS in writing within 30 days. And you have to include a description, everything that happened, all the relevant facts, the people involved, the policies and procedures that were violated, what actions you're taking, how you're going to make sure that this doesn't happen in the future, your sanctions. I mean, every single detail about the individual. So the person that violated it, now your name's in there for any violation because it says may have failed to comply. You've got to look into it. So you've got 30 days now to tell HHS about every time somebody didn't comply with a policy and procedure.
For 3 years.
For 3 years.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
WTF.
Hits the name. OMG. So the other piece is the annual reports, which is each year, no later than 30 days. Again, we have these brief timelines. No later than 30 days after the end of the reporting period. So this CAP started August 31st, and then they have 30 days after the end of the first year, 30 days after the end of the second year, 30 days after the end of the last year. So not a lot of time. The detailed description of updates or changes to your risk analysis or risk management plan and your strategy related to the assessment, the potential risk, and all these kind of things. And a detailed description of revisions to your policies and procedures and training materials, a summary of the reportable events. So the events that you had to report to them, now you have to give them a full summary of the ones that you were supposed to. And then my favorite part is at the end, it says that the annual reports require an attestation signed by an owner or officer that he or she has reviewed it and has made a reasonable inquiry regarding the content and believes information is accurate and truthful.
Put somebody on the hook.
Exactly. Don't say, well, my people did that. No, it goes all the way to the top, just like we always talk about. Your culture of compliance goes all the way to the top. So if you look at a lot of this stuff, you got to wonder how the corrective action plan doesn't become the big topic. Because to me, that means you're going to make a proper compliance program and you never have before. And if you don't, you're back in the hot seat even more.
Now, with this particular breach and settlement and all this, I mean, we talked about the last two things, the reportable events and the annual reports being kind of outside the norm. Do you believe that this is something that is because maybe this particular practice just wasn't doing anything right, so it was almost like we're going to make an example out of you? Or is this an indication of things to come in 2016 and beyond?
Well, it's we checked out your compliance program and it was so poor, we feel like we have to stay on top of you and keep our thumb on you for 3 years to be sure that you don't just, poke it with a stick and pretend that you're doing it. It's that's kind of the attitude. It's almost like OCR put them on serious restrictions. You got teenagers. I'm going to take away your phone. You got to make your bed. You got to do your homework.
They're on house arrest.
It's exactly it. You're house arrest. You're in serious trouble.
But as hard as it is for most practices to do HIPAA as it is, I mean, God, how are they going to be able to do these things properly?
We have people that are looking at the looking down the barrel, so to speak, of these settlement plans that have gotten us involved. And we're desperately trying to do as much of that corrective action plan activity starting now, while they're in the midst of that, what could be 3, 4, how many year program of going through the settlement process and the investigation. So I see it as a direct relation to the effort that your organization is putting into compliance.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at some of these corrective action plans, you can see they made a big mistake. They didn't do the risk analysis. They didn't do what they were supposed to do, but their corrective action plan is 1 year and it doesn't have this level of detail in it. So clearly, number one, they're getting strict. They're getting more strict. I don't know if it's stricter. Is it strict? Stricter?
More strict. Just more strict.
More strict. More strict. They're getting more strict with how they're defining exactly what you're going to do to build a proper compliance program. They're essentially saying, here's 3 years that you're going to stay on top of this and do this the way you're supposed to, and we're going to make sure you are. So their culture of compliance wasn't even there, clearly, for them to push it this hard. Or I can't say clearly. I have to say, I assume for them to push it this hard, that there really had no culture of compliance whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at this as a practice. We haven't seen one yet towards a business associate. And when we do, I'm not really certain how, we talk with business associates all the time because we really do a lot of work with software companies and IT companies like, we work with you and others. And we look at it and say, if this happened, it could destroy the whole business.
Mm-hmm.
They're out of business. And we've had a lot of CEOs say to their workforce, look, this is serious. We take it seriously from the top down. And if we had a major problem here that was directly related to our failures, it could destroy the business. This is how important it is. And that's the way the provider should be looking at it, but they don't.
Yeah. So this is definitely one of those things to look at as in my opinion, a fair warning to do HIPAA as best you can. If nothing else, do as much as you possibly can. Don't ignore it completely.
Well, or at least take the approach of, I'm making a reasonable effort to focus on this. I can show you and document. I'm having the meetings. I'm doing the training. I'm reviewing things. Bring people in like us. Yes, that can't be a bad thing. But if you don't want to spend the money on that, and we've actually had people who tell us, I really want your help, but the doctor says I need to read HIPAA myself and figure it out. We actually had somebody tell us that, like in your spare time, I want you to go read the Federal Register.
Yeah, good luck with that.
And there's stuff online and you just review it and you do what it says. So clearly that provider has no real understanding themselves. And so that's one of the things that we try to do with these podcasts. And the reason that you and I do this without, it's not a membership thing for these podcasts, is we want to educate people so that they can look at the bigger picture of what's going on. It's not something you read a book and then you go do it.
Yeah.
HIPAA for Dummies.
We give them a free podcast, and we even offer them a money back guarantee.
Yeah, double your money back guarantee.
So anything else on this one?
Well, the only other thing I wanted to add is people always say to me, I'm doing my risk analysis. How often do I have to do it? And, I don't want to have to do this every year. It's time consuming. I know. But in this particular corrective action plan, they specifically said they shall review the risk analysis annually or more frequently if appropriate, and promptly update it in response to environmental or operational changes that affect the security. So anytime you're seeing these kind of things in the corrective action plan, that should be your guidance to know that, yeah, you should do it annually. It's not saying do it every 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you do it now. And then after we're done, we want you to do it again. No, they want you to review it and update it, and even more frequently if you have major changes.
Right.
And one of the things I've told people, with ICD-10 implementation going on, have you done a risk analysis? If you've changed your software and you've changed your workflow, or you've changed anything in a major way of how data is moving around because you've implemented a coding tool or something, you need to do a risk analysis and know what's happening. No, hadn't done it yet.
Mm-mm-mm.
So there you have it. That was my OCR CAP OMG.
Yeah, I'm still. It's just one of those things you look at and you're like, wow, what in the world? Yeah. Hopefully there will be people that listen to this that it's a wake up call and they don't put themselves in the harm's way the way this company has.
Yeah. And I mean, we don't know the company, so we don't know the environment. We don't know the situation, but I know by the harshness of this, either they're being made an example of, or they didn't even make an effort to really dive in there and fix it after this major breach.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it could be a combination of several things that made it so strict. But I can assure you that even back in 2012, there were 3-year plans going into place that people are just now getting out from under. And they were strict and they were overwhelming to them, I am sure, because if you go back and look at the cardiology group in 2012 with the 6 physicians, I mean, those guys, they're the ones that were one of the first small practices, and they were put on a 3-year corrective action plan. So don't think it's the big guys.
Yeah. Yep. They're going to get you at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we talked about this before as well, but it's worth kind of reiterating here. You know, people always hear about hackers and random audits and all this kind of stuff. But a lot of times it's just going to be something else that gets you. It's not, you know, the random audit thing. I like to tell people that there's just so many business associates and covered entities out there that the chances of you having a random audit are going to be much, much lower than the chances of, like in this case, somebody smashing the window out of a car and taking a laptop that had information on it, or an employee doing something that, whether it's intentional or not, doing something that ends up causing a breach. And it's much more likely for those things to happen that ends up putting you under the microscope.
Yeah. And the microscope. It's like a colonoscopy.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
You can tell I'm in my 50s. We think about those things.
All right.
Yeah.
So,
there goes David. He's like, oh, I'm not going there.
Yeah. I think we need to end right there. Things are getting stinky.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that one. I knew you'd have something to say.
So we'd like to thank you for listening to today's podcast. And if you would like to head over to iTunes and give us a rating, we would definitely appreciate it. It helps us to get the word out and helps other people find us. So go to iTunes and give us a rating there. You can also go to our website at helpmewithhipaa.com. You can leave us a message there. And if you have a question, we might even feature it on a future podcast. So don't forget to also share us on your social media networks as much as possible. And anything else you want to say, Donna, before I close it off?
Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time. So thanks again for listening. And don't forget that HIPAA is not about compliance. It's about patient care.
You've been listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, hosted by Donna Grindle and David Sims. The show created to help you with HIPAA. For more information or to ask us a question, visit our website at helpmewithhipaa.com. Neither Donna Grindle or David Sims are attorneys, and they do not offer binding legal advice concerning regulatory compliance. The information in this podcast should not be relied upon or construed as legal advice in any way. Consult your attorney for legal advice concerning compliance with HIPAA regulations.